I sat in that sterile conference room watching Brandon Walsh fidget with his designer cufflinks while security officers stood like stone sentries behind his chair. The compliance investigators had spread documents across the mahogany table like playing cards in a high-stakes poker game, and I clutched the flash drive in my pocket that contained the evidence to end his career forever. 3 months earlier, I would have trusted this man with my life savings and my deepest secrets. Now I watched him weave lies about financial discrepancies he had personally orchestrated to frame me, knowing I possessed irrefutable proof of his elaborate embezzlement operation. When the CEO leaned forward and asked where the anonymous evidence file had originated, Brandon's confident mask crumbled, and his face drained of all color as the terrifying realization dawned that someone had been meticulously documenting his every criminal move. 6 months ago, walking through the gleaming marble lobby of Morrison Industries felt like stepping into my future. The 40-story glass tower in downtown Chicago housed one of the most respected financial consulting firms in the Midwest, and landing a position as their junior financial analyst represented everything I had worked toward since graduating with my accounting degree from Northwestern University. Fresh out of college at 24, I carried student loans that felt heavier than my oversized briefcase, but the starting salary promised to change my trajectory completely. My supervisor, Margaret Chen, introduced me to the finance department during my first week, explaining the intricate relationships between different divisions and the importance of maintaining absolute accuracy in our client portfolio management. Morrison Industries handled investment accounts for everyone, from small family businesses to major corporations, making attention to detail absolutely critical for our reputation and legal compliance. Brandon Walsh caught my attention immediately, though not for the reasons I would later understand. The tall, athletic man in his late 20s carried himself with the easy confidence that comes from never doubting your place in the world. His sandy brown hair was perfectly styled. His navy suits were clearly custom-tailored, and his warm smile made everyone around him feel important and valued. When Margaret mentioned that Brandon was the son of Patricia Walsh, the company's vice president of operations, I felt intimidated rather than impressed. During my second week, Brandon approached my cubicle with a friendly grin and 2 cups of coffee from the expensive shop across the street. He perched on the edge of my desk and asked how I was adjusting to the corporate environment, seeming genuinely interested in my responses. His questions were thoughtful and specific, focusing on whether I felt challenged by the work and if I needed additional resources to succeed. When I mentioned my background in forensic accounting coursework, his eyes lit up with what I interpreted as professional respect. He explained that Morrison Industries was expanding their audit services division and could use someone with my analytical skills and educational foundation. The conversation lasted nearly an hour, during which Brandon shared stories about growing up around the business and his vision for modernizing their client services approach. Over the following weeks, Brandon made a point of checking on my progress and offering guidance when I encountered complex financial instruments or regulatory requirements I had not seen in textbooks. He would stop by my desk in the late afternoons when most colleagues had gone home, rolling up his sleeves to help me understand sophisticated derivative calculations or international currency exchange protocols that my other supervisors assumed I already knew. His mentoring style was patient and encouraging, never making me feel stupid for asking questions that probably seemed basic to someone with his experience. When I struggled with a particularly complex hedge fund analysis, Brandon spent 3 hours walking me through each component until I could complete similar assessments independently. He praised my thoroughness and attention to detail, telling me that my willingness to dig deeper into financial records would make me invaluable to the firm. One evening in my 6th week, Brandon invited me to join a small group of junior associates for drinks at an upscale bar near the office. The gathering felt casual and welcoming, with colleagues sharing funny stories about client interactions and discussing their career aspirations within the firm. Brandon treated everyone with the same easy friendliness, picking up the tab without making a show of it, and ensuring that quieter team members were included in conversations. As we prepared to leave, Brandon pulled me aside and mentioned that he was assembling a special project team to handle some of Morrison Industries' most sensitive client acquisitions. The work would involve analyzing financial records for companies considering merger opportunities, requiring discretion and sophisticated analytical capabilities. He asked if I would be interested in joining the team, explaining that successful completion of these projects typically led to rapid advancement within the firm. The opportunity felt like validation of everything I had worked to achieve. Brandon emphasized that he had specifically requested me for the team based on my demonstrated competence and reliability, noting that Patricia Walsh had personally approved my inclusion after reviewing my performance evaluations. The project would involve working directly with high-value client accounts and learning about merger and acquisition procedures that most junior analysts never encountered. I accepted immediately, feeling grateful for Brandon's confidence in my abilities and excited about the learning opportunities the position would provide. He shook my hand with a firm grip and told me that I should expect to receive additional compensation for the specialized work, along with mentoring that would accelerate my professional development significantly. Walking home that night, I called my parents to share the good news about my promotion to the special projects team. My father, a small-town accountant who had always emphasized the importance of hard work and integrity, expressed pride in my rapid advancement, but cautioned me to remain humble and continue learning from experienced colleagues. My mother worried about the longer hours that specialized work might require, but I assured her that the opportunity was worth any temporary sacrifices. The following Monday, Brandon introduced me to the other team members in a conference room on the 32nd floor that I had never accessed before. The space featured floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan, expensive leather chairs, and state-of-the-art computer equipment that made my cubicle setup look antiquated by comparison. The 3 other team members were all experienced analysts who welcomed me warmly and seemed genuinely pleased to have additional help with their demanding workload. Brandon explained that our team handled confidential financial due diligence for companies considering major business transactions, requiring us to maintain strict confidentiality about client identities and transaction details. He distributed non-disclosure agreements for us to sign and emphasized that any breach of confidentiality would result in immediate termination and potential legal consequences. The seriousness of his tone made the work feel even more important and prestigious. Our first assignment involved analyzing the financial records of a manufacturing company in Wisconsin that was considering acquisition by one of Morrison Industries' major clients. Brandon assigned me to focus on cash flow analysis and accounts receivable verification areas where my forensic accounting background would be particularly valuable. He provided access to specialized software and databases that contained detailed financial information about thousands of companies across multiple industries. The work was challenging and intellectually stimulating, requiring me to identify patterns and inconsistencies that might indicate financial instability or fraudulent reporting. Brandon reviewed my analysis carefully, asking probing questions that helped me refine my methodology and improve the accuracy of my conclusions. His feedback was always constructive and specific, focusing on how to present findings more clearly rather than criticizing my analytical approach. After 2 weeks on the special projects team, I felt more competent and confident than ever before in my professional life. The work environment was collaborative and supportive, with team members sharing knowledge freely and celebrating each other's successes. Brandon's leadership style created an atmosphere where everyone felt comfortable asking questions and proposing innovative solutions to complex problems. One Friday afternoon, Brandon asked me to stay after the rest of the team had left for the weekend. He wanted to discuss a particularly sensitive assignment that required the highest level of discretion and analytical precision. The project involved reviewing financial transfers for a client who suspected that employees might be embezzling funds through sophisticated electronic manipulation of accounts receivable processes. The following Monday morning, Brandon provided me with access credentials for the internal financial systems that handled Morrison Industries' most sensitive client accounts. The responsibility felt enormous as he explained that these systems contained confidential information about merger negotiations, acquisition financing, and strategic business partnerships that could affect millions of dollars in transactions if leaked to competitors. He assigned me to focus on a specific subset of accounts that handled international wire transfers for clients involved in overseas manufacturing partnerships. The work required tracking money flows between multiple banks across different time zones, verifying that transfer amounts matched contracted specifications, and identifying any discrepancies that might indicate processing errors or intentional manipulation. During my first week with access to the advanced systems, I noticed small irregularities in several accounts that handled routine client transfers. The discrepancies were minor, typically involving amounts between $500 and $1,500 that seemed to disappear from transfers without corresponding documentation. Each missing amount was small enough to avoid triggering automatic audit alerts, but the pattern of consistent shortfalls across multiple accounts seemed suspicious. I spent 3 days meticulously documenting every discrepancy I could identify, creating spreadsheets that tracked the timing amounts and destination accounts for each problematic transfer. The work required cross-referencing multiple databases and manually verifying transaction codes that the automated systems had flagged as potentially irregular. When I brought my findings to Brandon's office on Thursday afternoon, he seemed genuinely surprised and concerned about the implications of what I had discovered. He studied my spreadsheets carefully, asking detailed questions about my methodology and whether I had considered alternative explanations for the discrepancies. His reaction felt appropriately serious, matching my own concern about the potential impact on client relationships and regulatory compliance. Brandon suggested that we needed to investigate the irregularities thoroughly before reporting anything to senior management, explaining that premature accusations could harm innocent employees and damage Morrison Industries' reputation if our analysis proved incorrect. He recommended that we work together over the next several weeks to expand the scope of our investigation and ensure that our conclusions were supported by irrefutable evidence. His cautious approach seemed wise and professional, particularly given his family's prominent position within the firm and his understanding of the political dynamics that could complicate internal investigations. I agreed to continue my analysis while maintaining strict confidentiality about our findings until we could present a complete picture of any potential problems. Over the following 2 weeks, I worked longer hours than ever before, staying in the office until 8 or 9 at night to conduct detailed reviews of financial records spanning the previous 6 months. Brandon often stayed late as well, reviewing my progress and suggesting additional areas for investigation that might reveal the full scope of any fraudulent activity. His dedication to uncovering the truth impressed me and reinforced my belief that he was committed to protecting Morrison Industries' integrity, regardless of personal or professional consequences. When I discovered additional discrepancies in accounts that I had not previously examined, Brandon's reaction was appropriately grave. Acknowledging that the problem appeared to be more widespread than we had initially suspected. During our late evening work sessions, Brandon often brought dinner from upscale restaurants near the office, insisting that proper nutrition was essential for maintaining the mental clarity that our investigation required. These shared meals created opportunities for deeper conversations about professional ethics, corporate responsibility, and the challenges of maintaining integrity in competitive business environments. Brandon shared stories about ethical dilemmas he had encountered earlier in his career, describing how he had learned to navigate complex situations where personal relationships conflicted with professional obligations. His willingness to discuss these challenges openly made me feel like a trusted colleague rather than a junior employee, deepening my respect for his character and judgment. As my investigation expanded to include more accounts and longer time periods, the scope of discrepancies I was documenting grew substantially. By the end of the third week, my spreadsheets included more than 200 suspicious transactions totaling nearly $60,000 in missing funds across multiple client accounts. The pattern was becoming clearer as I analyzed the data more comprehensively. The missing amounts consistently occurred during specific time windows, when automated oversight systems were offline for routine maintenance, and the transactions always involved accounts that processed high volumes of routine transfers, where individual discrepancies would be difficult to detect without careful analysis. When I presented my expanded findings to Brandon, he seemed troubled by the sophistication of the scheme I had uncovered. He pointed out that the timing and targeting of the fraudulent transfers suggested that whoever was responsible had detailed knowledge of Morrison Industries' internal systems and security procedures. This observation made me realize that we were likely dealing with an insider who understood exactly how to manipulate the company's financial controls. Brandon suggested that I needed to be even more careful about documenting my investigation methodology, noting that any eventual prosecution would require evidence that could withstand aggressive legal challenges from experienced defense attorneys. He recommended that I create detailed logs of every database query I performed and save backup copies of all relevant documents to ensure that our evidence could not be challenged or discredited. His attention to legal details impressed me and demonstrated his understanding of the serious consequences that fraudulent activity could have for everyone involved. I began maintaining meticulous records of my analytical process, creating a paper trail that would support our eventual conclusions, regardless of how aggressively they might be challenged. During the fourth week of my investigation, I made a discovery that changed everything I thought I understood about the financial irregularities. While reviewing transaction logs for one of the accounts with the most frequent discrepancies, I noticed that several unauthorized transfers had been initiated using my personal login credentials during times when I was not in the office. The discovery was shocking and terrifying, as it meant that someone had gained access to my security credentials and was using my identity to conduct fraudulent transactions. I immediately checked the logs for other accounts I had been investigating and found similar patterns of unauthorized access using my login information during evenings and weekends when I could prove I was not in the office. I printed copies of the relevant log files and rushed to Brandon's office with trembling hands, knowing that my discovery meant I was likely being framed for the very crimes I had been investigating. The sophistication of the scheme became clear as I realized that whoever was responsible had been using my legitimate investigation as cover for their own criminal activity, knowing that my comprehensive documentation would create a perfect paper trail leading directly to my personal credentials. I burst into Brandon's office without knocking, my hands shaking as I spread the computer logs across his desk. The evidence was undeniable and terrifying. My login credentials had authorized nearly 30 fraudulent transfers over the past month, including several that occurred while I was attending my cousin's wedding in Milwaukee, a 2-hour drive from Chicago, with dozens of witnesses who could verify my location. Brandon's reaction was everything I expected from a trusted mentor and friend. He immediately stood up, walked around his desk, and placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder while studying the documents with intense concentration. His face grew increasingly serious as he absorbed the implications of what I had discovered, and I felt grateful to have someone with his experience and family connections helping me navigate such a dangerous situation. After 20 minutes of careful analysis, Brandon sat back in his leather chair and looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. His usual warmth had been replaced by something colder and more calculating, though I attributed the change to the gravity of our situation rather than any shift in his feelings toward me. He began speaking in measured tones that felt different from his typical conversational style. According to his analysis, the evidence I had brought to him actually demonstrated a sophisticated embezzlement scheme that I had been operating for months. The timing of the unauthorized access corresponded perfectly with the financial discrepancies I had been documenting, creating a clear pattern of criminal activity that pointed directly to my involvement. I tried to interrupt to explain about the wedding and the witnesses who could verify my absence during several of the fraudulent transfers, but Brandon raised his hand to silence me. He continued his explanation with the patience of someone delivering unwelcome news to a confused colleague who had not yet grasped the full scope of their predicament. The spreadsheets I had created, he noted, provided detailed documentation of exactly which accounts contained vulnerabilities that could be exploited for embezzlement purposes. My late-night work sessions had given me unrestricted access to sensitive financial systems when oversight was minimal and security monitoring was reduced. The investigation I thought I was conducting had actually been reconnaissance for my own criminal enterprise. Brandon pulled out a thick folder from his desk drawer and began showing me additional evidence that painted an even more damning picture. Its security logs revealed that my computer had accessed the compromised accounts during extended evening sessions when I claimed to be working late on legitimate analysis. Email records showed that I had requested access to increasingly sensitive financial databases under the pretense of expanding my investigation. The most devastating piece of evidence was a series of encrypted files found on my work computer that contained detailed information about Morrison Industries' security protocols, client account structures, and automated oversight procedures. According to Brandon's explanation, these files represented the intelligence gathering that had enabled my embezzlement scheme to avoid detection for so long. I felt like I was drowning as Brandon continued presenting evidence that seemed to prove my guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. Every action I had taken in good faith to uncover financial irregularities had been documented and interpreted as criminal behavior. My dedication to thorough analysis had been reframed as obsessive planning for theft, and my requests for additional system access had been characterized as attempts to expand my fraudulent activities. When I tried to argue that someone else must have gained access to my credentials and computer, Brandon's response was sympathetic but firm. He explained that blaming unknown third parties for sophisticated financial crimes was a common defense strategy that rarely succeeded in court, particularly when the evidence trail was as comprehensive and damning as what we were reviewing. Brandon's tone became more personal as he expressed disappointment in my choices and confusion about my motivations. He reminded me of the trust he had placed in me by recommending me for the special projects team and providing access to sensitive client information. The betrayal he described feeling made my stomach clench with nausea and despair. He mentioned that he had already begun preparing a report for senior management about irregularities in the accounts I had been assigned to monitor. The report, which he showed me in draft form, documented a pattern of suspicious activity that corresponded perfectly with my work assignments and computer access. According to his timeline, the embezzlement scheme had begun shortly after I joined the Special Projects team and had escalated as I gained access to more sensitive systems. The report was devastating in its thoroughness and professionalism. Brandon had documented every aspect of the financial crimes with the same attention to detail that I admired in his legitimate work, creating a compelling narrative that explained how a trusted employee had exploited her position to steal from clients and cover her tracks through elaborate false documentation. When I begged him to consider that I was being framed, Brandon's response revealed the hopelessness of my situation. He explained that Patricia Walsh, his mother, and the company's vice president had already been briefed on the situation and was coordinating with the legal department to determine appropriate responses. The involvement of senior management meant that any investigation would be thorough and professionally conducted, but also that my fate was essentially sealed. Brandon's voice carried genuine regret as he explained that he would be required to recommend my immediate termination and potentially criminal prosecution. He emphasized that he took no pleasure in these recommendations, but that his obligations to Morrison Industries and their clients required him to prioritize protecting the company's interests over personal relationships. The meeting concluded with Brandon informing me that I should expect to be called to Human Resources within the next few days to discuss the preliminary findings of the investigation. He advised me to consult with an attorney and to avoid discussing the case with other colleagues who might become witnesses in any eventual legal proceedings. Walking back to my cubicle felt like a funeral march. My colleagues continued their normal work activities, unaware that I was about to become the subject of scandal and criminal investigation that would destroy my career and reputation. The friendly waves and casual greetings from co-workers felt surreal when I knew that they would soon learn to associate my name with theft and betrayal. That evening, I sat in my small apartment reviewing every interaction I had had with Brandon over the previous months, trying to understand when and how I had been maneuvered into such a vulnerable position. The mentoring relationship that had felt so supportive and encouraging now seemed like deliberate manipulation designed to position me as the perfect scapegoat for crimes I had never committed. The sophistication of the scheme became clearer as I realized that Brandon had guided my investigation toward exactly the accounts and time periods where fraudulent activity was occurring. His suggestions about expanding my analysis and maintaining detailed documentation had created a comprehensive record that supported his version of events while making my protestations of innocence appear desperate and dishonest. 2 days later, I received an email requesting my presence at a meeting with Human Resources and senior management. The tone was professional but ominous, providing no details about the agenda, but requesting that I bring any personal items from my workspace that I might need access to while the investigation was ongoing. The meeting was held in a conference room I had never seen before, featuring expensive artwork and a massive table that made me feel small and insignificant. Patricia Walsh attended the meeting along with the head of Human Resources, the company's general counsel, and Brandon, who avoided making eye contact as I entered the room. Patricia Walsh's demeanor was disappointingly professional rather than supportive, treating me like a problematic employee rather than someone who had been working closely with her son and contributing meaningfully to the company's success. Her questions were pointed and skeptical, focusing on my motivations for requesting access to sensitive financial systems and my explanations for the irregular patterns that had been detected in my work. The general counsel presented evidence that was even more comprehensive than what Brandon had shown me previously. Security camera footage showed me working alone in the office during times when fraudulent transfers had been initiated using my credentials. Computer forensics had revealed that the encrypted files found on my workstation contained information that could only have been compiled through systematic exploitation of security vulnerabilities. When I tried to explain that I had been conducting a legitimate investigation at Brandon's direction, Patricia Walsh's response made clear that my version of events was not considered credible. According to her understanding, Brandon had become concerned about irregularities in my work and had been monitoring my activities to determine whether formal intervention was necessary. The meeting concluded with my immediate suspension pending completion of a comprehensive internal investigation. Security officers escorted me from the building after supervising the removal of personal items from my workspace, a humiliating process that several colleagues witnessed with obvious confusion and concern. Suspended and facing potential criminal charges, I found myself alone in my apartment with nothing but time to think and a growing certainty that I had been systematically manipulated and betrayed. The initial shock and confusion were gradually being replaced by anger and determination to understand exactly how Brandon had orchestrated my downfall and whether there was any way to prove my innocence. My first step was to carefully reconstruct every interaction I had had with Brandon since joining Morrison Industries, looking for patterns and inconsistencies that I had missed while trusting him completely. Using my personal laptop, I created detailed timelines and tried to identify moments when he had guided my actions in ways that would later support his false narrative about my criminal activities. The manipulation had been subtle but comprehensive. Brandon had consistently encouraged me to work late and alone, creating opportunities for unauthorized access to sensitive systems that could later be attributed to me. His suggestions about expanding my investigation had led me to examine exactly the accounts where fraud was occurring, making my knowledge of vulnerabilities appear suspicious rather than diligent. Most importantly, Brandon had been present for nearly every significant discovery I made during my investigation, giving him advance knowledge of what evidence I was compiling and how it could be reinterpreted to support accusations against me. His role as my mentor had provided perfect cover for monitoring and directing my activities while maintaining plausible deniability about his own involvement. I began researching Brandon's background more thoroughly using professional networking sites and public records to learn about his previous employment and educational history. The investigation revealed that he had worked internships at 2 other financial consulting firms during college and graduate school, both of which had experienced similar embezzlement schemes involving junior analysts who were ultimately terminated and prosecuted. The pattern was remarkably consistent across all 3 companies. In each case, a young female employee had been accused of exploiting her access to sensitive financial systems to embezzle moderate amounts of money over extended periods. The accused employees had all maintained their innocence, but had been unable to provide convincing explanations for evidence that appeared to demonstrate their guilt clearly. At Meridian Financial Services in Denver, a junior analyst named Sarah Martinez had been convicted of embezzling $43,000 through unauthorized wire transfers. At Platinum Wealth Management in Phoenix, an associate named Monica Chen had been terminated and prosecuted for stealing $37,000 through manipulation of client account transfers. Both women had claimed that they were innocent and had been framed by colleagues who had access to their computer credentials, but their protestations had been dismissed as predictable attempts to avoid responsibility for their crimes. Both had received significant prison sentences and had their professional reputations permanently destroyed. I located contact information for both Sarah and Monica through public records and professional databases, hoping that they might be willing to share their experiences and potentially help me understand how Brandon's scheme operated across multiple companies. The conversations were difficult and emotional, as both women had suffered tremendous personal and professional consequences from their wrongful convictions. Sarah Martinez had served 18 months in federal prison before being released on parole. Her conviction had made it impossible to find work in the financial services industry, and she was currently employed as a bookkeeper for a small construction company at a fraction of her previous salary. Despite the years that had passed, she became emotional when describing the bewilderment and helplessness she had felt when evidence mounted against her for crimes she had never committed. Monica Chen had avoided prison through a plea agreement that required her to pay full restitution and accept 5 years of probation, but the conviction had similarly destroyed her career prospects and financial stability. She was working as a retail manager while attending night school to earn a teaching certificate, hoping to eventually rebuild her life in a completely different profession. Both women described remarkably similar experiences of being mentored by Brandon during their employment at their respective firms, receiving praise for their analytical abilities and dedication to thorough investigation of financial irregularities. In both cases, Brandon had recommended them for special assignments that provided access to sensitive systems where embezzlement later occurred using their login credentials. The most chilling similarity was that both Sarah and Monica had discovered evidence of unauthorized access to their accounts during times when they could prove they were not in the office, but their protests had been dismissed as desperate attempts to create reasonable doubt about their obvious guilt. The evidence against them had been so comprehensive and convincing that even experienced defense attorneys had advised them to accept plea bargains rather than risk more severe sentences after trial convictions. Learning about Brandon's history of destroying innocent women's lives filled me with rage, but also provided hope that a clear pattern of criminal behavior could be established if the right people were willing to listen. I began documenting everything I had learned about the previous cases, creating a comprehensive report that demonstrated Brandon's systematic approach to embezzlement and scapegoating. My research into Morrison Industries' internal structure revealed that the company employed an external compliance firm, Integrity Auditing Solutions, to conduct annual reviews of financial controls and regulatory compliance. The firm specialized in investigating complex financial crimes and had a reputation for thorough and impartial analysis that courts and regulatory agencies respected. I also discovered that Tom Bradley, a senior accountant in Morrison's finance department, had been with the company for over 15 years and had a reputation for meticulous attention to detail and unwavering ethical standards. According to professional networking profiles and company newsletters, Tom had received multiple awards for his contributions to financial accuracy and regulatory compliance. Through careful research of company email directories and organizational charts, I learned that Tom had been involved in some of the same client accounts that I had been investigating, suggesting that he might have observed irregularities or suspicious activities that could support my claims about Brandon's criminal scheme. Contacting Tom required careful consideration of legal and practical risks, as any communication with current Morrison Industries employees could be interpreted as attempted obstruction of justice or witness tampering. However, I decided that establishing contact was essential if I was going to have any chance of proving my innocence and preventing Brandon from destroying more lives. I sent Tom a carefully worded email from my personal account, introducing myself as a former colleague who was conducting research related to financial compliance procedures at Morrison Industries. I mentioned that I was working with external investigators on matters that might be of mutual professional interest and requested a brief conversation about industry best practices and ethical standards. Tom's response came within hours and was surprisingly direct and supportive. He indicated that he had been aware of my suspension and had been troubled by inconsistencies in the official explanations for the investigation. He suggested that we meet for coffee at a location away from the Morrison Industries building, where we could discuss our mutual concerns about recent developments within the finance department. Our first meeting was cautious and professional, with Tom clearly being careful about what information he shared and how his cooperation might be perceived by Morrison Industries management. However, as I described my experiences and shared documentation of Brandon's pattern of behavior across multiple companies, Tom became increasingly engaged and supportive. Tom revealed that he had been conducting his own informal investigation of irregularities in several client accounts over the past 6 months, focusing on discrepancies that seemed to follow patterns similar to what I had documented. His analysis had identified suspicious activities that corresponded closely with time periods when Brandon had been working on special projects and accessing sensitive financial systems. Most importantly, Tom had attempted to report his concerns to Patricia Walsh several weeks earlier, only to be told that the matters he had identified were already under investigation and that his continued involvement was unnecessary. Patricia Walsh had specifically instructed him to discontinue his analysis and to avoid discussing his findings with other colleagues, instructions that Tom had found professionally troubling. Tom's willingness to share his knowledge and documentation represented the first real hope I had felt since the nightmare began. Together, we began developing a comprehensive plan to present our combined evidence to external investigators who could conduct an impartial review of the situation and potentially expose Brandon's criminal activities. Working with Tom Bradley transformed my desperate situation into a coordinated investigation with the potential to expose the truth and achieve justice. Tom's 15 years of experience at Morrison Industries provided institutional knowledge and credibility that my accusations alone could never have achieved, while his documented concerns about financial irregularities corroborated my claims about Brandon's suspicious activities. Our collaboration required careful planning and discretion to avoid alerting Brandon or Patricia Walsh to our activities. Tom continued working his normal schedule at Morrison Industries, while quietly documenting additional evidence and identifying other colleagues who might have relevant information about the financial irregularities we were investigating. Tom's access to internal systems allowed him to verify many of the details I had provided about unauthorized access to client accounts and suspicious transaction patterns. His independent analysis confirmed that the timing and targeting of fraudulent transfers demonstrated sophisticated knowledge of Morrison Industries' security protocols and oversight procedures that would only be available to employees with high-level access privileges. Through his position in the finance department, Tom also had access to security camera footage and computer activity logs that external investigators would need to subpoena. He began carefully copying relevant documentation while ensuring that his activities would not be detected by IT security monitoring systems that could alert management to his investigation. Most importantly, Tom provided crucial context about Patricia Walsh's role in covering up Brandon's activities. According to Tom's observations, Patricia had been unusually involved in reviewing audit procedures and security protocols for the accounts where fraud had occurred, making changes to oversight requirements that had the effect of reducing detection capabilities for the types of embezzlement Brandon was conducting. Tom revealed that Patricia Walsh had also intervened in several previous investigations of financial irregularities using her authority as Vice President of Operations to limit the scope of internal reviews and prevent external auditors from examining sensitive client accounts where problems had been identified. The pattern of obstruction and cover-up that Tom described made clear that Patricia Walsh was actively protecting Brandon's criminal activities rather than simply being deceived by his false accusations against me. Her position within the company hierarchy gave her the authority to manipulate investigations and silence potential witnesses, making it nearly impossible for internal reporting procedures to function effectively. With Tom's support and documentation, I reached out again to Sarah Martinez and Monica Chen to request their assistance in building a comprehensive case against Brandon that could demonstrate his pattern of criminal behavior across multiple companies. Both women were initially reluctant to become involved in another investigation related to their traumatic experiences, but they ultimately agreed to provide testimony and documentation when I explained how their cooperation could prevent other women from suffering similar injustices. Sarah Martinez had maintained detailed personal records of her interactions with Brandon during her employment at Meridian Financial Services, including emails, meeting notes, and timelines that demonstrated how he had manipulated her into accessing sensitive systems and investigating specific accounts where embezzlement later occurred. Her documentation revealed manipulation techniques that were nearly identical to what I had experienced at Morrison Industries. Monica Chen had similarly comprehensive records from her time at Platinum Wealth Management, including correspondence with defense attorneys and court records that detailed the evidence used to prosecute her wrongfully. Her case files included expert testimony about computer security vulnerabilities that could have allowed unauthorized access to her login credentials, testimony that had been dismissed by prosecutors who were convinced of her guilt. Together, Sarah and Monica provided a devastating picture of Brandon's systematic approach to financial crimes and scapegoating that had been operating for at least 5 years across 3 different companies. The consistency of his methods and the similarity of outcomes for his victims established a clear pattern of premeditated criminal behavior that would be difficult for any reasonable person to dismiss as coincidence. Tom's analysis of internal Morrison Industries communications revealed that Brandon had specifically requested assignment to the accounts where embezzlement had occurred, and that he had been granted unusual access privileges for someone with his limited experience and job responsibilities. Email records showed that Patricia Walsh had personally approved access requests that circumvented normal security protocols and oversight requirements. The evidence was becoming overwhelming, but Tom cautioned that presenting our findings through internal channels would be futile, given Patricia Walsh's demonstrated willingness to obstruct investigations and protect her son. He recommended that we contact Integrity Auditing Solutions directly and request an independent review of the financial irregularities we had documented. Integrity Auditing Solutions was led by Rebecca Martinez, a former FBI financial crimes investigator with 30 years of experience in complex embezzlement and fraud cases. The firm's reputation for thorough and impartial investigations had made them the preferred choice for major corporations and government agencies dealing with sophisticated financial crimes that required specialized expertise and absolute objectivity. Tom arranged an initial consultation with Integrity Auditing Solutions through official channels at Morrison Industries, presenting our request as a routine proposal for enhanced compliance monitoring that would strengthen the company's regulatory standing and client confidence. His position and reputation within the company made the request appear legitimate and professionally motivated rather than suspicious. During our first meeting with Rebecca Martinez and her team, we presented a carefully organized summary of evidence that demonstrated Brandon's pattern of criminal behavior without initially revealing the scope of Patricia Walsh's involvement in covering up his activities. The presentation was designed to appear like a routine compliance issue that had been identified through normal internal monitoring procedures. Rebecca Martinez's response exceeded our most optimistic expectations. Her team had extensive experience with embezzlement schemes involving insider knowledge and credential manipulation, and they immediately recognized the sophistication and systematic nature of the criminal activities we had documented. They agreed to conduct a comprehensive independent investigation that would examine all relevant financial records and computer security logs. Most importantly, Integrity Auditing Solutions had the authority to conduct their investigation independently of Morrison Industries management, ensuring that Patricia Walsh would not be able to obstruct their work or limit their access to relevant evidence. Their reputation and legal standing gave them credibility with law enforcement agencies and regulatory bodies that could ultimately prosecute Brandon and Patricia Walsh for their crimes. The investigation would require several weeks to complete, but Rebecca Martinez assured us that her team would maintain strict confidentiality about their work until they were prepared to present comprehensive findings to appropriate authorities. She emphasized that their goal was to establish the truth about financial irregularities at Morrison Industries, regardless of who might be implicated by the evidence. Tom and I began providing detailed documentation to the Integrity Auditing Solutions team, including computer logs, financial records, witness testimony from Sarah Martinez and Monica Chen, and evidence of Patricia Walsh's role in obstructing previous investigations. The collaboration felt like the first time since my suspension that I had reason to hope for justice and vindication. Working with professional investigators who understood the sophistication of financial crimes and the tactics used to frame innocent employees provided validation that I had not been paranoid or delusional in my assessment of Brandon's manipulation. Their expertise confirmed that the evidence against me would never have withstood scrutiny from experienced investigators who were not influenced by internal company politics or family relationships. As the investigation progressed, Rebecca Martinez's team began uncovering additional evidence of financial irregularities that extended far beyond the accounts I had been assigned to monitor. Their analysis revealed that Brandon's embezzlement scheme had been operating for nearly 3 years and had stolen substantial amounts from dozens of client accounts across multiple business divisions. The scope of the crimes was far greater than any of us had initially suspected, involving coordination between Brandon and several other employees who had been recruited to assist with accessing sensitive systems and covering up fraudulent activities. The investigation was revealing a criminal conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of Morrison Industries management and had been systematically stealing from clients while framing innocent employees to cover their tracks. The Integrity Auditing Solutions investigation moved forward with the methodical precision of seasoned professionals who understood that their findings would ultimately be scrutinized by federal prosecutors and defense attorneys in high-stakes criminal trials. Rebecca Martinez assembled a team of computer forensics experts, financial analysts, and former law enforcement investigators who began systematically examining every aspect of Morrison Industries' financial operations and security procedures. Their work was conducted in complete secrecy, with Morrison Industries management believing that they were conducting a routine compliance review to strengthen regulatory procedures and client protection measures. Patricia Walsh had personally approved the investigation after Tom Bradley presented it as a proactive measure that would demonstrate the company's commitment to ethical business practices and transparent financial management. The irony of Patricia Walsh approving an investigation that would ultimately expose her own criminal activities was not lost on any of us, but it provided the perfect cover for comprehensive examination of evidence that would have been impossible to obtain through normal channels. Within 2 weeks, the investigation had uncovered evidence that far exceeded our most pessimistic expectations about the scope of criminal activity at Morrison Industries. Computer forensics analysis revealed that Brandon had been conducting unauthorized access to client accounts for nearly 4 years, using increasingly sophisticated techniques to avoid detection by automated security systems. The stolen amounts totaled over $400,000 across more than 60 client accounts, representing systematic theft that had been disguised as routine processing errors and accounting adjustments. The embezzlement scheme had grown progressively larger and more complex as Brandon gained experience and confidence in his ability to manipulate financial systems without detection. Most damaging to Brandon's credibility was evidence that he had been accessing the compromised accounts from his personal laptop during evenings and weekends using sophisticated software to mask his location and identity while conducting fraudulent transactions. Computer logs showed that he had been stealing money on the same dates when unauthorized access had been attributed to my credentials, definitively proving that I had been framed for his crimes. The investigation also revealed that Ashley Cooper, Brandon's girlfriend, who worked in Morrison Industries' IT department, had been providing him with inside information about security protocols and helping him gain unauthorized access to sensitive systems. Email records between Brandon and Ashley contained detailed discussions about vulnerabilities in the company's financial networks and strategies for avoiding detection by audit procedures. Ashley had used her position in IT to modify security logs and delete evidence of Brandon's unauthorized access, creating false records that supported accusations against me while hiding his actual criminal activities. Her technical expertise had been essential for the sophistication of the embezzlement scheme and the effectiveness of the cover-up operation. Perhaps most shocking was evidence that Patricia Walsh had been directly involved in the criminal conspiracy from its earliest stages. Financial records revealed that she had been embezzling much larger amounts than Brandon, using her executive authority to authorize transfers that appeared legitimate, but were actually theft of client funds for her personal benefit. Patricia Walsh had stolen over $800,000 during the previous 3 years, using techniques that were far more sophisticated than Brandon's crude manipulation of junior analyst credentials. Her thefts involved creating false consulting contracts, approving fraudulent vendor payments, and manipulating investment account balances to hide missing funds from client portfolios. The discovery that Patricia Walsh was the mastermind behind the entire operation, rather than simply a protective mother covering for her son's mistakes, transformed the investigation into a complex federal case involving multiple felonies and sophisticated financial conspiracy. The total amount stolen exceeded $1,200,000, placing the crimes well within federal prosecution thresholds that carried severe mandatory prison sentences. Most relevantly for my situation, the investigation revealed that Patricia Walsh had specifically orchestrated my hiring and assignment to the Special Projects team as part of a deliberate plan to create a scapegoat who could be blamed for the financial irregularities that audit procedures were beginning to detect. My background in forensic accounting and my lack of connections within the company had made me an ideal target for manipulation and eventual prosecution. Rebecca Martinez explained that sophisticated financial criminals often identify vulnerable employees who can be maneuvered into positions where they appear responsible for crimes they never committed. The technique was particularly effective when the criminals had insider knowledge of company systems and the authority to influence hiring and assignment decisions. The investigation timeline showed that Patricia Walsh had begun planning the frame-up operation months before my employment at Morrison Industries, even began carefully structuring my job responsibilities and security access to ensure that evidence would point toward my involvement in financial irregularities when they were eventually discovered. As the investigation neared completion, Rebecca Martinez's team prepared to present their findings to federal authorities and coordinate arrests of Brandon Patricia Walsh, Ashley Cooper, and 2 other Morrison Industries employees who had been recruited to assist with the embezzlement scheme. The evidence package included computer forensics, financial documentation, witness testimony, and expert analysis that provided irrefutable proof of the conspiracy. Tom Bradley had been working closely with the investigators while maintaining his normal duties at Morrison Industries, carefully monitoring Brandon and Patricia Walsh's activities to ensure that they did not become suspicious of the investigation or attempt to destroy additional evidence. His observations revealed increasing tension between mother and son as audit procedures identified irregularities that were becoming harder to explain through routine accounting adjustments. The breakthrough moment came when computer monitoring systems detected Brandon attempting to access client accounts after normal business hours using techniques that had previously been attributed to my unauthorized activities. Real-time surveillance captured him using Ashley Cooper's IT credentials to modify security logs and delete evidence of his access, providing undeniable proof of ongoing criminal activity. When confronted with this evidence during what he believed was a routine security briefing, Brandon attempted to destroy his personal laptop and cell phone before realizing that investigators had already copied all relevant data from his devices. His panic and obvious guilt provided additional confirmation that the investigation had accurately identified the perpetrators of the embezzlement scheme. Ashley Cooper was arrested at her apartment the following morning, caught in possession of software and documentation that had been used to manipulate Morrison Industries' financial systems. Her cooperation with investigators provided detailed information about the technical aspects of the embezzlement scheme and Patricia Walsh's role in planning and directing the criminal activities. The final phase of the investigation involved coordinating with Morrison Industries' senior management to ensure that client accounts were secured and that restitution procedures could begin immediately after arrests were completed. The company's CEO and board of directors had been completely unaware of the criminal activities and were committed to full cooperation with law enforcement and complete transparency about the scope of the theft. Patricia Walsh was arrested at her office during what she believed was a routine meeting with external auditors. Her reaction to the arrest provided clear indication of guilt as she immediately began making statements about her son's involvement and her own efforts to protect the company's reputation rather than maintaining innocence about any criminal activities. Brandon was arrested simultaneously in the Morrison Industries parking garage as he attempted to leave work early, apparently having been warned by his mother that their criminal scheme was being exposed. Security footage showed him attempting to destroy documents and electronic devices before being taken into custody by federal agents who had been monitoring his activities. The arrests were coordinated carefully to prevent any of the conspirators from warning others or destroying additional evidence. Within 6 hours, all 5 defendants were in federal custody facing charges that carried potential prison sentences of 10 to 20 years, depending on their individual levels of involvement and cooperation with ongoing investigations. The federal courthouse in downtown Chicago felt like a temple of justice as I walked up the marble steps, 6 months after my wrongful suspension from Morrison Industries. The intervening months had been filled with depositions, testimony, and legal procedures that had gradually transformed me from suspected criminal to key prosecution witness in one of the largest corporate embezzlement cases in the district's recent history. The trial proceedings were comprehensive and methodical, with federal prosecutors presenting evidence that painted a devastating picture of systematic financial crimes orchestrated by Patricia Walsh and executed with the assistance of her son Brandon, his girlfriend Ashley Cooper, and 2 other Morrison Industries employees who had been recruited to assist with the scheme. Patricia Walsh faced the most serious charges, including conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, embezzlement of client funds, obstruction of justice, and racketeering violations that reflected her role as the mastermind behind the criminal enterprise. The evidence against her was overwhelming, including financial records that traced stolen funds directly to personal accounts, email communications with co-conspirators, and testimony from multiple witnesses who described her efforts to obstruct investigations and silence potential whistleblowers. Brandon's charges were similarly comprehensive, focusing on his role in executing fraudulent transactions, framing innocent employees, and actively participating in the cover-up operations that had allowed the criminal scheme to continue for nearly 4 years. His previous involvement in similar crimes at other companies was presented as evidence of a pattern of premeditated criminal behavior that demonstrated his sophistication and deliberate intent. Ashley Cooper faced federal charges related to her technical assistance with the embezzlement scheme, including unauthorized access to computer systems, tampering with security logs, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Her cooperation with investigators after her arrest had provided crucial evidence about the technical aspects of the crimes, but her involvement had been too extensive for prosecutors to offer significant sentence reductions. The prosecution's case was strengthened enormously by testimony from Sarah Martinez and Monica Chen, whose experiences at Brandon's previous employers demonstrated his systematic approach to financial crimes and victim manipulation. Their courage in testifying despite the personal trauma involved in revisiting their wrongful convictions provided powerful evidence that helped prosecutors establish Brandon's pattern of criminal behavior. Tom Bradley's testimony was particularly compelling as his 15-year reputation for integrity and attention to detail at Morrison Industries gave credibility to his observations about suspicious financial activities and Patricia Walsh's efforts to obstruct internal investigations. His documentation of irregularities and attempts to report concerns through proper channels demonstrated that internal controls had been deliberately circumvented by the conspirators. My own testimony focused on describing the manipulation techniques that Brandon had used to position me as a scapegoat for crimes I had never committed. The experience of recounting those months of trust and betrayal was emotionally difficult, but it provided jurors with clear insight into the sophisticated psychological manipulation that financial criminals often employ to avoid detection and accountability. The defense strategy for all defendants involved attempting to minimize their individual roles while shifting blame to other participants in the conspiracy. Patricia Walsh's attorneys argued that she had been manipulating company systems to cover losses caused by Brandon's unauthorized activities rather than conducting her own embezzlement scheme. Brandon's lawyers claimed that his mother had pressured him into participating in criminal activities and had threatened his career if he refused to cooperate. Neither defense strategy proved effective against the comprehensive evidence that prosecutors presented. Computer forensics, financial documentation, witness testimony, and expert analysis provided irrefutable proof that all defendants had knowingly participated in systematic theft of client funds while deliberately framing innocent employees to cover their tracks. The jury deliberations lasted only 2 days before returning guilty verdicts on all major charges against all defendants. Patricia Walsh received a sentence of 12 years in federal prison, plus restitution requirements that would require her to surrender all personal assets, including her home investment accounts and retirement savings. The judge specifically noted that her abuse of executive authority and systematic obstruction of justice warranted the maximum sentence allowed under federal guidelines. Brandon was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison, with the judge emphasizing that his pattern of criminal behavior across multiple companies and his deliberate destruction of innocent women's lives demonstrated a level of malicious intent that required significant incarceration to protect society and deter similar crimes. Ashley Cooper received 5 years in federal prison, despite her cooperation with investigators, reflecting the court's determination that technical expertise used to facilitate financial crimes required serious consequences to prevent similar offenses by other IT professionals who might be tempted to abuse their access privileges. The financial restitution requirements exceeded $2 million when interest and penalties were included, ensuring that Morrison Industries clients would be fully compensated for their losses and that the defendants would face long-term financial consequences for their criminal activities. Morrison Industries' response to the criminal convictions was swift and comprehensive. The company's CEO issued public apologies to all affected clients and employees, implemented enhanced security procedures designed by independent consultants, and established victim compensation programs that provided financial support for employees who had been wrongfully accused or terminated due to the criminal conspiracy. I was offered immediate reinstatement to my position at Morrison Industries, with a promotion to senior financial analyst, a substantial salary increase, and a settlement package that compensated me for lost wages, legal expenses, and emotional distress caused by my wrongful suspension and the attempted destruction of my career and reputation. The settlement also included guarantees that Morrison Industries would provide positive references for any future employment opportunities and would publicly acknowledge my innocence and professional competence in any context where my wrongful suspension might affect my career prospects. More importantly, for my long-term career goals, the experience had provided me with unique expertise in detecting and investigating sophisticated financial crimes that made me highly valuable to companies and government agencies seeking to strengthen their internal controls and prevent similar criminal schemes. 6 months after the trial concluded, I established Martinez Forensic Consulting, a specialized firm that helps companies identify vulnerabilities in their financial systems and develop procedures to prevent embezzlement and fraud. The business has grown rapidly as news of the Morrison Industries case has increased awareness about the sophistication of modern financial crimes and the need for proactive security measures. Sarah Martinez and Monica Chen both found new career opportunities that utilized their experience and expertise while providing them with fresh starts after their wrongful convictions were officially expunged from their criminal records. Sarah accepted a position with a federal agency that investigates financial crimes, while Monica returned to corporate finance with a company that specifically values employees who understand the importance of ethical business practices. Tom Bradley was promoted to Chief Financial Officer at Morrison Industries' recognition of his integrity and his crucial role in exposing the criminal conspiracy that could have continued causing harm for years if he had not been willing to risk his career to support the investigation. The relationships I developed with Sarah, Monica, and Tom during our collaboration have evolved into lasting friendships based on our shared commitment to justice and our understanding of how financial crimes can destroy innocent lives when criminals abuse positions of trust and authority. Looking back on the experience, I realized that the months of terror and uncertainty taught me invaluable lessons about the importance of thorough documentation, the power of collaboration in fighting injustice, and the reality that evil often disguises itself as mentorship and opportunity. The criminals who tried to destroy my life ultimately provided me with the knowledge and motivation to build a career dedicated to preventing similar injustices and protecting other potential victims from sophisticated financial predators who exploit trust and manipulate systems for personal gain. The experience also reinforced my belief that truth and justice will ultimately prevail when good people have the courage to stand together against corruption and refuse to be intimidated by powerful individuals who abuse their authority to harm others. Patricia Walsh and Brandon Walsh learned that family name and corporate position provide no protection against the consequences of criminal behavior when their victims refuse to be silenced, and when dedicated professionals are committed to uncovering the truth, regardless of political pressure or personal cost. Today, my consulting firm has helped dozens of companies strengthen their financial controls and prevent embezzlement schemes similar to what I experienced at Morrison Industries. Each successful case represents not only professional achievement, but also personal vindication and proof that the nightmare I survived has been transformed into a force for protecting others and promoting justice in corporate environments. The most satisfying aspect of my current work is training other financial professionals to recognize manipulation techniques and protect themselves from becoming scapegoats for crimes they never committed. Every person I help understand these tactics represents a potential victim who will be prepared to fight back, rather than becoming another casualty of sophisticated financial predators. My story proves that even the most elaborate criminal schemes can be defeated when victims refuse to accept injustice and when they find the courage to seek truth and accountability despite overwhelming odds and powerful adversaries who seem impossible to overcome. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where someone you trusted completely turned out to be manipulating you for their own benefit? How did you find the strength to fight back when the odds seemed impossible? I would love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe to hear more stories about overcoming injustice and finding the courage to seek truth when powerful people try to destroy your life. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that justice is possible even in the darkest situations, and remember that sometimes the greatest victories come from refusing to give up when everyone else expects you to surrender. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it inspires you to never stop fighting for what is right, no matter how hopeless things might seem.